The chair recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, what do you think the estimated total fraud is for the PPP program?
On the PPP program, we don't have a fraud estimate, but there was $36 billion estimated for improper payments. We're looking at, making that. The only one we have a fraud estimate now for is, at the low end, was unemployment insurance, which we estimated was over $60 billion.
And what can we do in the future to prevent the PPP, fraud or mispayments, and also on the unemployment?
First is not allow just total self-certification. That invites fraud. Secondly was to make sure the agencies implement GAO's framework for preventing fraud in the first place. Secondly is to require internal control plans that have special procedures for emergency loan programs. We're about ready to issue a report on a framework for that going forward, but I think it would be good if Congress required that framework in law. And also, any new program over $100 million, in my opinion, should be automatically deemed susceptible to improper payments, so that there's an estimate made earlier in the process. Under the current rules, it could be 2 or 3 years before they make an estimate of improper payments. And this is what happened with PPP. I mean, the first time they did it is 2022. They should have begin doing it a lot earlier, but we recommended they do, but they weren't able to do it or didn't do it.
We don't hear a lot in this building common sense, in good sense, so thank you for that. The Department of Defense spends billions of dollars each year to acquire and modernize business systems, including ones that address key, areas such as like personnel, financial management, healthcare, and logistics, et cetera. And in my opinion, every time it seems like the good idea fairy visits the Pentagon, a new colonel gets his wings. I mean, it's massively bureaucratic over there, and I sit on the HASC committee. There's so much duplicative effort over there, and it comes as no surprise to me that we struggle to bridge the kind of the valley of death in a system designed like that. Through your work at the GAO, how do you think the DoD can best streamline business functions at the Pentagon?
Implement leading practices. We do a lot of studies. I'll ask Tim DiNapoli to come to the table to explain about how we've used leading practices to improve their weapon systems portfolio.
So through the years, as I've mentioned before, DoD has been unable to deliver weapon systems on a timely basis, and cost increases. So what we did for the last 20 years, have gone out to the private sector to look at a variety of companies and see how they develop and produce their systems. By looking at, and the companies that we identify cut across industries, so it's not one particular segment. We try to look for the best companies in particular areas. And what we've been able to do is to distill those practices that are common to leading companies. We've made a series of recommendations through the years for the department to incorporate those. And for the most part, at least in the early years, the department has been able to do that in their policies. They don't follow them on a consistent basis, which means that from a practice perspective, they're not following what the policies are. We're currently updating that work to identify new practices based on new technologies and new information. And we've identified 3 or 4 key things that the department could do in terms of trying to develop weapon systems and field them more quickly. The department has not yet implemented those in their policies. We find mixed in terms of whether or not individual programs are implementing them in their practices. So I think there's a ways to go yet in terms of how weapon systems can be acquired. But that same principle can apply to almost any business modernization system as well.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's obvious that the DoD can learn a lot from the private sector. Do you think that they're looking enough to the private sector for that help and for really just to follow that example? You don't always have to reinvent the wheel.
It's always a challenge, right? Because folks within the department have a legacy system, and they're trying to maintain those.
Yeah.
And so trying to develop new systems requires both the maintaining of the existing, make sure we have those capabilities, and then figuring out a way to implement those new processes in an efficient, effective way. There's sometimes challenges on both sides.
An efficient and effective way. That's what we're after.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important is that we've been trying to impress upon the department the importance of maturing technology before you put it into production. Oftentimes, they rush ahead. Now, I know that there's, pressures to meet, peer competition, near peer competition, and other things that force them to do that, but that leads to costly reinvestments down the road where they have to correct things. I mean, the Joint Strike Fighter is a good example of that, and we're looking at the Columbia-class submarine development. That's got some scheduling issues and others. So, but that's an important part as you sit on your assignments on the defense committees to check on is the maturity of the technology before they hit the production button.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.